From the protagonist of a cult favorite series devolved to a fan favorite side character to a less popular character. A suggested for mature readers book that somehow spawned out of the Teen Titans. Definitely an interesting predicament to be in. One thing that a lot of people for some reason want comics to be is gritty, dark, and quote-unquote realistic, but a lot of the time it just comes out dry and uninteresting, like an initially cool-looking rock that just crumbles when you pick it up. Probably because it's kind of impossible to make a realistic superhero comic, so you just end up with a colorless movie with the soul ripped out of it. Typically, I stay away from this kind of thing when I'm reading comics, until things went a little off the rails. This being that I got so invested in Blue Beetle that I had a Peacemaker reading marathon, and in this process ended up reading a few issues of Vigilante 1983. Then once I finished reading some more Peacemaker, I was like, that Vigilante book I read some of was kind of good. I should go back and read the rest of that. And so I read the rest of it. So here we are, and the thing about Vigilante, I feel, is that it somehow manages to strike a balance between dark and gritty and pure comic book. Vigilante is technically two different legacy titles, but I've only read one of them, and there is zero connection between the two of them as far as I can tell, so we're staying away from Cowboy Country and focusing instead on the series of New York City slicking anti-heroes. For the most part, there were three main Vigs: Adrian Chase, Alan Wells, and Dave Winston. After this, there was Justin Powell, Dorian Chase, Donald Fairchild, and a number of Deathstroke's ex-girlfriends, for some reason. But none of them really fall into the core legacy. Plus, I'd like to stick to the 80s here. And you know one thing I can say about all three of our main vigilantes and most of the characters surrounding them?
My pinky won me again! What?
Fuck it, cut off all his toes, I don't care!
Just like with any superhero mantle, Vigilante starts as a tragedy. Adrian Chase is a promising young district attorney with the world in his hands and everything a man could want. He has a wife who loves him dearly and two kids who mean the world to him. The perfect nuclear family. Then he starts getting involved with the Teen Titans, which, for the record, is his own idea. By his proximity to them, he feels that he is now able to start ensuring that justice is served how he deems fit. This ends with him on a mob hit list and an explosion in his apartment. Adrian is the sole survivor, but with a taste of what walking outside of the law is like, he wants his revenge. So he takes up the name Vigilante and gets it. Adrian Chase is dead. Long live the Vigilante. And then, just like any superhero, he can't be on the top of the world forever. He gets one of his only friends at the time killed, and he loses everyone all over again. JJ isn't really dead, but Adrian Chase never really gets the chance to learn that. Things starts to get better. He gets a new girlfriend. He gets a position as a judge and gives up Vigilante to start a new, better life. Long live Adrian Chase. The Vigilante is dead. Until he's not, and Alan Wells takes up the mask. He's a killer of people who commit even minor crimes, and he's dragged Adrian's former name through the mud, bad enough that Nightwing gets in his face about it. So he tries to put a stop to it. Adrian doesn't know that his best friend is the one wearing the mask until he's already shot him in the chest. The Vigilante is dead, killed by Adrian Chase. Still desperate to let the Vigilante die, Adrian doesn't take the role back up. But because no one else seems ready for the possibility, a young bailiff working under Adrian by the name of Dave Winston puts on the mask. Even though he was there when Adrian killed Alan, he still took it up. Still comes to Adrian to ask for advice, to tell him that his mission is a worthy one to take up. Dave is killed by Peacemaker in front of Adrian. Dave may be the one who's shot, but Adrian dies right along with him. The Vigilante is back in Adrian's hands all over again. His girlfriend leaves him for good. He kills a police officer by mistake while retrieving the costume from Dave's apartment. By this point, he's already given up. That one action decided his fate entirely. It's a long time coming when Adrian kills himself in issue 50. The writers say they decided on that ending back in issue 37. The book between the two issues is all the long, slow build-up necessary for the final climax. Really, Adrian died alongside his wife and children. It was just a long, slow, agonizing death rather than a quick one. He never got his happy ending. He never even stood a chance.
What are you doing, man? There's no wrong time to rock, motherfucker.
Now is. This is the wrong time to rock.
Another thing of note is that none of the Vigs were ever really big-time guys, for the most part. It was all street-level threats to the city of New York. The mob, really. They only had a handful of costumed adversaries, and that's across all three OGs. Dorian handles a little more fantastical mob threats, but that's just barely, and we're not talking about him. I feel this is one of the better ways to keep a character more grounded. It's hard to say you're even trying to be realistic if your hero is fighting Darkseid. But no, that's not what Adrian's up for. He's up for handling the criminals that the system won't. He wants to bring justice, one way or another. It's this grounded goal that puts two more in Adrian's very same suit. It's this goal that eventually tears Adrian apart, but it's what he's got. And I'm sorry, but when reading comics, I tend to like the street level crime fighter a bit more. Just because with that kind of character, you get more character, more opportunities to connect with them. Not to say I don't like characters like Wonder Woman or Superman. I just prefer this when it comes to vigilante type superheroes. Your Batman and your Nightwings, and your Vigilantes. So Vigilante's got its layer of darkness and its layer of quote unquote realism, but it also doesn't fall into the trap that this kind of comic book often does, where it forgets that it's a comic book world where things aren't exactly supposed to be realistic. Instead, it allows itself to get away with a little bit of comic book fantasy. Adrian's backstory starts off as any old gritty action heroes would, but it doesn't exactly stay that way for too long. Every hero needs their training montage, and what better way is there than his? After his family's funeral, Adrian is left alone at his wife's grave. Well, almost alone. There's a cloaked woman just there. When she tells him to follow her, he doesn't care enough about his well-being to not simply go along with her. He follows her to a secret place in the middle of the desert. There, he's trained in combat, but skills are not all that he learns over the course of his training arc. By the end of it, he's left with the uncanny ability to heal much faster than the average man. He's not invulnerable, but little can keep him down for very long. Had he survived a little further into the 80s, he probably would have been classed as a metahuman. Before he leaves, he's told a secret by all of those who mentored him. He's not in a place of the living. He is surrounded by thousands of the ghosts of those who were killed for the sake of greed or in an act of injustice. They've gathered to train champions to bring justice to the world. Adrian is one of those chosen, for had he died, the explosion that killed his family would have led to him joining them in death rather than life. Why he doesn't join them after he dies is never really explained, don't worry about it. So he must be their champion among the living and finally bring real justice to the world. He barely reflects on this, barely believing it to have happened at all, but seeing as the whole run he's barely ever injured, and when he is, he gets up very quickly, you kind of see that it must have been real. It doesn't always lean too far into the fantastical, but it still has it. It doesn't get scared and doesn't shy away. It knows it's a comic book. It knows the world it exists within. This is part of what I really enjoyed about Vigilante. It manages to strike that balance where I feel a lot of superhero stories trying to be realistic miss it. It makes it. And with a good blend of the elements of a more realistic character and a good handling of the universe and habits, it isn't out of place when Cyborg shows up. Electrocutioner makes sense. It knows what it's doing.
I think it might have made things worse.
I also just feel like I really want to talk about Adrian's relationships for a moment, his romantic ones in particular. Over the course of 50 issues, Adrian has two girlfriends, Marcia King and Black Thorn, and I feel like there's definitely something to be said about how his relationships with both of them characterize Adrian's descent into madness. He starts dating Marcia pretty early in the run. It's an attempt by him to try and move past his grief for his wife and explore new horizons and a future. JJ and Terry think this is good for him, but Adrian hides Vigilante from her. He's still trying to have some kind of separation. He doesn't want to give himself fully over to Vigilante yet. He's with her when he gives up Vigilante. He tries to be normal. He tries to move past all of this. He's going through the motions of what he thinks a normal person would do, even if he isn't really moving past Doris at all. He never moves past Doris. She's the one person who he thinks he can actually love. Everyone else is just him going through the things that normal people do. And when Adrian eventually returns to Vigilante, he loses Marcia in the process. He doesn't seem to be too broken up about it. He's fallen from any semblance of living a life, and he's been set up to die. It's all a downward spiral from here. Black Thorn, meanwhile, is very interesting to me. For one thing, just as a character, she is one of the countless reflections of Adrian. She is a dark vigilante. The only difference is she doesn't wear his costume. She models herself after him. He led her down this path in a way. But the way that she sees justice and the way he does are different, even if just minutely, and he doesn't like that, but at the same time, he's so far gone that he can't be bothered to completely care. The fact that he's with her and not against her is a major sign of Adrian's fall. He's so close to the end now. And she's bad for him. She gets him arrested. But I do think she cared for him. Later in Checkmate, she goes through the trouble of retrieving her seized items for just one thing, Adrian's ashes. Even then, she didn't tell him anything about herself. He never got to learn her real name. But she cared. But by this point, Adrian was much too far gone to care about her back. I don't even know if he was capable of loving anybody by that point. He's dead before we can get much more on their relationship. Now, I would normally end it here, but I feel like I really do need to talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to talking about Vigilante.
I take it you're Vigilante.
No?
Despite having been a cult classic character back in the 80s, nowadays, most people's first introduction to Vigilante is Freddie Stroma's rendition in the DCEU show Peacemaker. He's probably going to carry over into James Gunn's DCU when Peacemaker does too, but it's just a little interesting to me. Objectively, prior to the DCEU, Vigilante was the better known character. You don't have a 50-issue ongoing solo for pure obscurity, and yeah, Peacemaker and Vig have definitely interacted before. It was Peacemaker who killed Dave Winston. It was Peacemaker who led to Adrian putting the costume back on. It was Peacemaker who unmasked Adrian on live television, so yeah, they certainly know each other. Have a bit of a history, and I'll admit, it was in my Peacemaker reading marathon that led me to discovering Vigilante. But the guy in the show is not Adrian Chase. I mean, technically he is, but the name and the costume are about where the similarities start to dwindle. You usually expect a degree of change between a comic and its adaptation, but this was a wild change. This Adrian feels almost like a mix of our three main vigilantes. He's not any of them specifically, but that sums it up a bit more than calling him any of the three of them. He's got Adrian's name, suit, older brother, and clear of something very wrong with him. He's got Alan's ruthless killing and firm sense that any small crime can warrant the death penalty. He's got Dave's enthusiasm in the cause and strong sense of looking up to a hero who really isn't all that great. And he's probably got Adrian's healing factor too. But there's also a good bit of uniqueness that he brings to the role. Enough to the point where I'd call him I don't even know, vigilante. He's his own guy entirely, basically. I think I've got that covered. Where was I going with this? Vigilante is a role that has been held by many, many characters over a 40-year time period. And it's one of the few times where I've witnessed one of these dark, gritty, and realistic superhero stories and not just come away tired. I actually enjoyed it. How the story came out of a Teen Titans book, I'll never quite be sure, but I'll be pretty glad that it did. Until next time, listeners.